Last season was the season of the Bengals. Joe Burrow came back from injury and ended up shocking a lot of people. He won Comeback Player of the Year and helped Cincinnati make it all the way to the Super Bowl in a very odd, lucky fashion. Burrow became a pop culture icon, and Cincinnati ended up falling just short of a ring. This year, well, it's been pretty confusing. The Bengals have looked bad at times and even started the season 0-2, but Cincinnati has turned it back around, now with a winning record. But there are still a lot of questions. Like, are the Bengals actually good? It's definitely been kind of a weird season for the Bengals. It didn't start off nearly as well as they had hoped. You're coming off of a Super Bowl where you barely lost in the big game, and you're probably super hungry to see what it's like on the other side. But Cincinnati just looked flat early on. That first game of the year had a lot of people scratching their heads. Pittsburgh wasn't supposed to be particularly good, and Joe Burrow came out and threw 4 picks, and the Bengals ended up losing in overtime. It was definitely a bit of a concerning start, but it only got worse in week 2. Remember, Dak Prescott ended up getting hurt in week 1, so the Cowboys had to throw out Cooper Rush, and the Dallas defense was good enough to still be able to find a win in week 2. That's one hell of a hole to be into after 2 weeks. 0-2. There was the hope and belief that the Bengals were going to be able to turn things around, and they did. That being said, I do think Cincinnati has lucked into some of the easiest games this season. Getting to play Mitch Trubisky to start the year, and then going up against Cooper Rush in his second career start is something you'd be pretty excited about, and they ended up losing both games. The Bengals got their first win in week 3 against the Jets, playing another backup quarterback, Joe Flacco. Then, the next week, Tua Tagovailoa got hurt, and the Bengals were able to pull away to beat the Dolphins late, again, playing a backup quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater. Week 5 was the first true good quarterback the Bengals had to face, and it was a big-time AFC North matchup that Lamar Jackson got the win in to put the Bengals at 2-3. Now, stop me if you've heard this before, but the Bengals lucked out and got to play a backup quarterback in week 6, Andy Dalton. Cincinnati won, barely, and then in week 7, the Bengals played the Falcons and won handedly, and I'd argue it's really been the only quality win for them this year. So, are the Bengals actually good? Probably not. I'm not saying they haven't looked good at times, but let's be honest here. They've probably benefited from the easiest paths through 7 weeks and are only 4-3. Those 4 wins have come against Joe Flacco, who was only starting because Zach Wilson was injured, Teddy Bridgewater, who was only playing because Tua Tagovailoa got hurt earlier in the game, Andy Dalton, who was only playing because Jameis Winston was hurt, and Marcus Mariota, who has actually been pretty solid. I don't really have much to argue there. But he does play on one of the least talented teams in football. Not to mention, a couple of the losses have come to pretty bad quarterbacks too. Mitch Trubisky quite literally isn't even the starter anymore. He was benched for Kenny Pickett, and Cooper Rush was only playing because Dak Prescott was hurt. Lamar Jackson is really the only good quarterback that the Bengals have played, and luckily for them, they get to keep on lucking out. Next week, they have Jacoby Brissett, only playing because Deshaun Watson is suspended, and the Browns have looked pretty damn bad recently. After that, it's the Panthers, who might be playing third stringer PJ Walker still, or one of their other 2 bad quarterbacks, Baker Mayfield or Sam Darnold. Week 10 is a bye, and then Cincy gets to face the Steelers and Kenny Pickett, who, by the way, has thrown 3 picks in 2 of his 4 career games so far. Cincinnati is going to be able to set itself up pretty well if it can win those games, which isn't a gimme, considering they've already lost to Pittsburgh. But after week 11, suddenly the Bengals are going to have to play some good football teams, and personally, I just don't think they'll be able to keep up. The Titans have won 4 straight. While Ryan Tannehill ain't great, he's not bad, but definitely not great, Tennessee will probably win the AFC South, because, well, the division is ass. Then Cincinnati has to face Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in week 13, before turning around and playing a Browns team that does have Deshaun Watson. Then back-to-back road games against Tom Brady and Tampa Bay, who, let's be real here, looks like a shell of his old self, but he is still Tom Brady, followed by a trip to Brady's old stomping grounds, New England. And who knows who's going to be behind center in that game, whether it be Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi. There does need to be the conversation about the Bengals and if they're actually good or just lucky. There's been a lot involved. I don't think the Bengals quite stack up to the Ravens when it comes to the AFC North, but luckily the other two teams are kind of suspect, at least for now. Kenny Pickett is still trying to learn and figure out the ropes, so I can't really see Pittsburgh being good anytime soon, especially this season. As for Cleveland, well, they're going to be in a complete funk until Deshaun Watson is back, and even then, we're talking about a guy that hasn't seen the field since the 2020 season. I don't think he looked great in the preseason, and it's probably going to take a minute for him to get back to being good, let alone to see if he can ever get back to what he once was. The Bengals have been put in good situations and gotten a bit lucky, and that's what a lot of people thought last year, and it seems to maybe be continuing this season. There were a lot of things that just really didn't make sense about the Bengals last year, but credit where it's due, they did still play in a Super Bowl. The offensive line was really bad, and Chase and Cincinnati definitely tried to address the line, but it just wasn't enough. That was by far the Bengals' biggest issue in 2021, was that the offensive line just couldn't stop anybody. That divisional round game against the Titans, Burrow got sacked 9 times, a postseason record. If you played that game 10 times, I'm confident Tennessee probably wins 9 of them. Not to mention, if you switch out Ryan Tannehill for a better quarterback, the Titans probably win, but that's a different discussion. In the regular season, Cincinnati lost to the Bears, Jets, and the Browns twice, all of which weren't particularly good at all. The Bengals were really close to losing in the wild card to the Raiders too. Remember, that was the game where the whistle blew a play dead, but it wasn't ruled dead and Cincinnati somehow scored. I still don't understand, but that same officiating crew was taken off for the rest of the playoffs, and recently just cost the Falcons a game against the Buccaneers with that wild roughing the passer call late on a 3rd down that cost Atlanta the game. Las Vegas got the ball back, and if Derek Carr capitalizes there, the Raiders win. And the AFC champ did seem to get every single bounce to go their way, and so far this season, it's been a lot of the same. But one thing hasn't changed from last season. Cincinnati is losing to teams that they probably shouldn't be. The Bengals have turned things around this season to some extent, but that might just be fool's gold. Once the going gets tough, it's hard to see Cincinnati being able to compete with the best of the best. But here's the good news. Joe Burrow is still good. Before the season, some people claimed he was as good as a top 5 quarterback in the league, which was just nuts. He got so severely overrated, it was just crazy. But somehow, early this season, we got to the point where he was almost underrated. Everyone decided Burrow just wasn't good, but he is still a good NFL quarterback. Let's make that very clear. In the last 2 weeks alone, Burrow has thrown for 781 yards and 6 touchdowns with no interceptions. He's graded out well and passed the eye test. By every measure, Joe Burrow is still a good quarterback, and as long as the Bengals have him, they should feel secure. But there are issues all over the roster. Cincinnati very well may fall apart again down the stretch. No, that isn't because of Joe Burrow, but simply because the Bengals have gotten very lucky in recent times. And once the luck runs out, so will the Bengals' success.